The story begins with a popular virtual reality game called The New Gate, but it suddenly becomes a deadly game when the players can't log out, and dying in the game means dying in real life. The only way to escape is by beating the game, and we meet Shinya, who is determined to make it to the end. We see Shinya ready to challenge the final boss of the game, while his NPCs tell him to be careful. He starts fighting with the boss, and he manages to cut off its wing, but it regenerates, so he decides to attack faster. He manages to get its HP low, and it tries to regenerate again, but he delivers the finishing blow. He gains several titles, and the game system announces that the final boss has been defeated, so the players can finally log out. He checks his scroll to see the players leading the game, until he's the last one left, and he prepares to leave, but a gate suddenly opens, leaving him confused, since the boss was the last event of the game. He wakes up in a field outside, and he wonders what happened. It seems too real to be a game, so he checks his window, and realizes his stats have increased thanks to the titles he received after defeating the boss. He tries to log out again, but can't find the option, and he tries to see if anyone is online, but he has no network connection, so he wonders how he's playing without internet. He uses an item to find his way home, but on the way, he sees a city that wasn't there before. He sees his house, but he notices a girl in need of help, as the guys drag her out of a barrier. A monster suddenly appears, so they run away, but Shinya manages to save the girl. They go inside the house, and the girl introduces herself as Tiara, thanking him for saving her. She thinks he's a friend of her master, but Shinya doesn't know who she's talking about. Tiara mentions that everyone knows Shay from the Moon Sanctum, and he becomes surprised, because Shay is one of his support characters. He notices she's suspicious, so he explains that they're old friends, and asks where she is. But Tiara doesn't want to tell him because he's a stranger, but she can deliver a message to Shay, saying it costs 1,000 jewels, but he shows a coin, and explains he only has one gale. She wonders if he used an item box, because only kings can use one, and she's also surprised by the gale coin, because one of them is worth 10 billion jewels, saying they can be enchanted. But he notes that in the game, one gale was the smallest amount of money. Tiara wonders who he is, so Shinya explains he's a high human, but he discovers that only 6 high humans existed in the world, and they disappeared 500 years ago during the dusk of prosperity. Shinya is confused, and she wonders how he doesn't know the historical event where many people disappeared. He thinks she's talking about the mass logout, and realizes that thousands of people logging out at the same time became a major incident, realizing he's been sent 500 years into the future of the game. He thanks her for teaching him this, and offers a gale as a token of gratitude, and she's happy to have one. Shinya thinks it will be useful to her, since elves are good at magic, but she wonders how he knows she's an elf, because Shay put an illusion spell on her. Shinya wonders why she'd do that, so she reveals that elves with black hair are a bad omen. She was expelled from her village for always being attacked by monsters, so Shay changed her appearance and brought her to the shop, where she can stay safe thanks to the barrier, and she has been living like this for the last 100 years. Shinya realizes why the boar appeared, and she mentions her hair was silver before. He decides to analyze her, and discovers she has a curse that manifests randomly. He knows how to undo it, and he uses purification on her, but he's disappointed that only part of her hair returned to normal, but she can't believe it, and gets emotional. They try to leave the barrier, but they aren't attacked, so she cries tears of joy. Back at the Moon Sanctuary, Tiara explains that Shay will take a while to return, so he decides to visit the city to learn more about this world. She has something to help him enter the city, and shows a letter of recommendation, saying he can use it to pass through the town's checkpoint. He thinks it's too much, but she wanted to thank him even more. She promises to let him know when Shay returns, so Shinya thanks her before leaving. He enters the city of Bari, and the guard explains that the letter of recommendation is a big deal because it works in other kingdoms, and he can even get an audience with the king. The guard takes Shinya to the Adventurers Guild, where he tries to register as an adventurer, but the receptionist explains that registrations happen on the first floor. So he goes to the first floor, and thinks the receptionist looks a lot like the last one, so she explains that the last one is her twin sister Celica, and she's Cilia. He waits for his adventurer card, and Celica appears with something to eat, so he starts eating, but she keeps staring at him, so he wonders what happened. She wants to verify his letter of recommendation, and Shinya finds out that the guild master is right behind him. They decide to talk, and the man introduces himself as Barlux. He places another letter of recommendation next to Shinya's, and Barlux sees that they resonate, so he knows it's genuine. He explains that letters of recommendation are valuable, as they're the most reliable form of identification and grant access to many places, so many people try to steal them. It would be a disaster if it fell into the wrong hands, so he asks him to destroy it if he can't protect it, but Shinya assures him that he'll be fine, and he can't do that after Tiara trusted him with it. Barlux is glad to hear this, and thinks they will get along well, since they're both men recognized by the sanctuary. The next day, he goes to get his adventurer card, and Celica sees that he's wearing new clothes, while he thinks his other outfit was too flashy for a low-class adventurer. She gives him the guild card, and explains that there are 9 ranks starting from G, and he can go up to double S rank by completing missions, but he can only accept jobs 2 ranks higher than his. Shinya takes on an herb collecting mission, and says goodbye to her, while Celica thinks about how he seems different from the others. We see Shinya frustrated in the forest, because he has been searching for hours, and remembers that in the game, this mission was for beginners. He suddenly notices an enemy on the radar, so he goes to see, and discovers that it's a skull-faced Jack with a level of 359. He finds a broken carriage, and can't ignore it, so he decides to attack it. He wonders why an undead is holding a light sword, and thinks it's a unique monster. He attacks it again, but it doesn't seem effective, and his sword is already damaged, so he has no other choice, and unlocks his limit. He charges again, but this time, he eliminates the monster with 1 strike. The sword flies away, and he regrets it because he wanted it. The monster drops a gemstone, so he decides to accept it, as the sword lands in the castle, and the guards are confused about what happened. They wonder what to do, so the second Princess Rion asks them to call an appraiser to analyze the sword, and investigate who threw it into the castle, thinking he must be strong. Shinya walks through the city, and he sees injured soldiers. The guard explains that a squad of 12 was attacked by the Skullface, but only 4 returned, and Shinya realizes that the carriage belonged to them. The guard also mentions the sword thrown into the castle, so Shinya feels guilty for the trouble. He returns to the guild, and Celica notices that the adventurers gathered to defeat the Skullface, but Shinya reveals that he already killed it, and shows the gem it dropped, leaving her in disbelief. She shouts that one person is not enough to defeat a Skullface, but turns red for getting too close. Celica's co-worker Alice suddenly appears, and Celica tells her that Shinya defeated the Skullface Jack. But he explains that he has no proof, because the equipment from the Skullface isn't much, so he didn't bring it with him, and Alice finds it strange, since even rank B equipment can be worth a small fortune. She asks Celica to analyze the gemstone, since it should contain the Skullface's mana. Shinya wonders about the frequency of Skullfaces, and Alice explains that many people lose their lives in the northern forests due to the monsters. So the ranks of the dead can merge with mana, creating the perfect environment for undead creation, but the forest doesn't have much mana, so there shouldn't be a powerful undead. Shinya realizes it was an exception, and reveals that its level was 359, which shocks both of them. Celica runs to analyze the stone, and Alice explains that if this is true, he's stronger than a rank A group, but he asks her to keep it a secret, since he doesn't want to draw attention. He goes to the restaurant, and while he waits, Cilia explains that someone will share the table with him, since they're full. A man suddenly appears with a legendary spear called Venom, and sits next to him. He introduces himself as Avis, and assumes Shinya is a new adventurer, but notices he's above average. Shinya explains that it's his 3rd day, and he doesn't know much, because he's from the countryside. Avis realizes that's why he isn't afraid of him, and mentions that they call him a vampire, because he hunts many undead. Shinya wonders if it's because he's pale, which makes everyone nervous, but Avis laughs, and reveals that the real reason is his spear, because it can drain life. Cilia brings the food, so they enjoy their meal together. He later goes to the library to research the decline of glory 500 years ago, but there aren't many records about it. Meanwhile, Barlux is in a meeting to talk about the Skullface. They wonder who would defeat a Jack and not collect its armor, while Owls explains that he didn't find it impressive. The old man thinks those with letters of recommendation are strange, and they mention that on the day the Skullface was defeated, the sword was thrown into the castle, so they wonder if the events are related. Barlux wonders what the sword looked like, so the night Aldi reveals that the blade was 2 meters long, made of magical steel, and enchanted with the element of light, so it's as powerful as the national treasure. Barlux is surprised it's a legendary grade weapon, and Aldi thinks he can't ignore someone who defeated a monster with that sword. Shinya eats a skewer in the square, and notices a girl staring at him, so he offers her food, and notices she doesn't look like a beggar. The girl is a tiger type, and she introduces herself as Millie, thanking him for the food. Avis suddenly appears, and he explains that Millie is an orphan from the church, so he always has to get her when she runs away. He decides to go home, but Millie goes up to Shinya and whispers in his ear before leaving. At night, Shinya wonders why Millie asked him to rescue a fox in the forest. He thinks it might be a good pastime until Shay returns, but realizes he forgot to leave his message for Tierra. So he goes to the Moon Sanctuary and asks Tierra to show Shay his sword when she sees her. He mentions that it can only be used by him and Shay, or someone designated by them. She realizes it's a powerful ancient weapon, and she's actually scared of it. Shinya thinks it must be because of its materials, and mentions the monsters he defeated to create it, but Tierra wonders why he keeps talking about legendary monsters. He asks her to keep it safe anyway, and gives her letters to keep in touch, explaining that they will be able to reach him no matter where he is, because she just has to write the person's name and say send. But Tierra wonders why he doesn't send it directly to Shay, so he explains that he tried, but kept failing. He tries using it with her, and she receives the letter, so it's working, and Shinya figures it's because he hasn't met Shay in this new world yet. Tierra asks for more letters, because she wants to be a mage and study the item. He thinks it's okay, so he gives her more before leaving. He goes to the northern forest to look for the fox, and keeps walking until he finds a shrine. He continues, but suddenly feels something. He finds a small fox inside the building, and notices that it has a poison effect, and is also cursed. He quickly cures it, but this revives an army of the undead, so he summons his spear, and starts eliminating the skeletons. He kills all of them, but the statues begin to break, and 2 demons come out of them. He has never seen these monsters before, and they're level 674. They attack him, but he dodges, and uses a skill called Shadow Binding, but they release a curtain to escape. He can't see anything, but the wolves keep attacking him. The fox suddenly shows him something, and he realizes it's the magic circle where it was, and the mist doesn't enter there, so he can use his skills. The wolves charge at him, but he uses his binding bow, eliminating them with 1 strike. The mist clears, and the fox jumps into his arms. He wonders what race it is, and discovers it's an elemental, one of the strongest monsters in the game. He has never heard of a baby version, but asks if it wants to go with him, so it jumps onto his head. He notices it understands him, and also realizes that some things are different from the game. Meanwhile, Shay receives Tierra's letter, wondering how she has this magical item, and is surprised to learn about her master. Shinya thinks it's better to hide the elemental from the guild, so he suggests making a pact with it. He explains that it's like a partnership between a tamer and a monster, and it hides the monster's level and species, so they can be together all the time. The fox seems excited, so he creates the pact, and a symbol appears on both of them. He also names her Yuzuha, and she seems to like it. He suddenly gets a message from Tierra, because she managed to talk to Shay, and she's waiting for a response. He's happy with the news, and decides to go to the guild. He reports the army of the undead he found in the forest, and he looks for a job. He notices a mission at the orphanage near the church, and thinks it must be a special request, since it has no rank. He also remembers that Millie lives there, so he decides to visit her, and takes the job. He arrives at the church, where a woman named Tria greets him. She asks if he came for the job, so he confirms this, and also mentions Millie. They go to a room, where he meets Millie, who gets excited and hugs him. Tria notices he's not a bad person, and it's been a long time since Millie got attached to someone like that. Shinya asks Millie if this is the fox she mentioned, so she confirms and thanks him, and he explains to Yuzuha that he could only rescue her because of Millie, so she thanks her. He turns to Tria and asks about the request, so she mentions it's about a skill successor, and Shinya realizes that apparently few people have skills now. She explains that she's looking for a skill for him to teach, and Shinya wonders if it involves healing or poisoning, but she reveals its purification. She knows it's hard to find, but she gets surprised by Shinya's reaction and learns that he can teach it. But Shinya has a condition, saying he wants to know about Millie's powers and also wants her to share any information from the church because he needs to learn more about the world. She seems hesitant, but Millie explains that Shinya isn't a problem, so she accepts his terms. Tria talks about Millie's powers and reveals that she has the title of Star Composer, so she has unexpected visions that never fail. Shinya notes that it's a powerful ability and mentions that many would want to take advantage of it, but she assures him that she told everyone to be discreet about it. She tells him that an adventurer helps the orphanage because he used to be an orphan, and Shinya realizes she's talking about Avis as she explains that everyone is afraid of him, so the kids are safe. Shinya is ready to teach the skill, but she explains that she's not the one who's going to be learning the skill. She wants the granddaughter of the former priest to learn it, since things would be easier if she inherited the church. Later on, Yuzuha plays with the other orphans, and Shinya feels lonely because she's stealing all the attention. He wonders if Millie doesn't want to play with Yuzuha, but she thinks she can't compete with the older kids. But Yuzuha suddenly goes to his head, and Millie gets a chance to have her all to herself, so Shinya realizes her plan was to be close to him. A nun suddenly appears and asks if he's the one who will save them, but he wonders what she means. She looks sad and reveals that they're about to close the orphanage, explaining that the church doesn't have a priest at the moment, so someone has to take over. He wonders why Tria doesn't do it, but she explains that it needs to be someone with a specific skill, and the person sent to take over the church wants to get rid of the orphanage. The granddaughter of the former priest has the right to inherit the church, but she still needs to have this skill. Shinya realizes why Tria needs him, but wonders why the priest wants to get rid of the orphanage, so she mentions that it's because he only cares about money. Later on, Tria calls for Shinya and sees him with the other children. She introduces him to the granddaughter of the former priest, who introduces herself as Rashia, but bites her tongue, while Tria explains that she can be clumsy, but is hard-working. They start talking, but Avis suddenly appears to find out who accepted the job, and discovers it was Shinya. He asks Shinya about his intentions, but Millie reassures him, so he realizes she saw something, and decided to trust Shinya. He asks about the skill, so Shinya explains that Rashia can get it after defeating 200 undead creatures that are over level 150, while holding a sacred orb. They're shocked to hear this, but he assures them that he can weaken the monsters for her to land the final blow, and he also has the orb, so it won't be that difficult. Rashia is speechless, but she promises to do her best, so Avis decides to go with them, because he realizes that Shinya isn't a normal person, thinking there's only one explanation. Avis calls Shinya for a drink, and asks him if he's a chosen one, someone who has a title or knowledge that he shouldn't have. Shinya asks if it's like memories of a past life, but Avis explains that it's information about items and monsters, so Shinya doesn't think he's a chosen one. Shinya notices that Avis is caring, and thinks he's a hero who protects the orphanage. Avis pretends it's because he gets annoyed by the kids crying, so Shinya smiles at how bad a liar he is. He sees a message from Tiara, mentioning that Shay said she'd come back soon, and Tiara is surprised by how much she asked about him. He suddenly gets another notification, so he checks it, and his letter of recommendation appears. Avis is surprised to see it, and reveals that he has one too, so Shinya can't believe it, realizing that they have something in common. The next day, the trio goes to the Ghost Plains, where they encounter the undead. Shinya traps them with his barrier, while Avis breaks their legs to immobilize them, and Rashia finishes them off using healing magic, which damages the undead. They do this until they reach a barrier, which contains higher-level monsters. Avis uses his adventurer card to enter, and they keep weakening monsters, so that Rashia can land the final hit, and Shinya explains that she'll be at level 150 when she learns purification. On the other side of the Ghost Plains, Rion defeats a skull-faced Jack, and is impressed with how much easier it is to beat them with her new sword. The knight is worried about the other group, but Shay offers to handle it. The group is desperate, and she arrives at the last minute, quickly defeating the undead, and breaking its core, while everyone looks at her in shock. Shay quickly heals them, and the commander thanks her, knowing they would have been forced to retreat without her. Shay explains that it was only possible because they weakened the monster, but the commander knows that's not true. He remembers that several unusual undead have appeared in the last month, and still can't believe she took down a monster that his entire squad couldn't, realizing that this is the strength of someone who fought with the high humans. She decides to search the area in case there are more undead, reminding him they can call her using the items she gave them, and she runs through the forest, eager to see her master again. Meanwhile, Avis faces a skull-faced Jack, and he easily defeats it, allowing Rashia to land the final blow. She's suddenly surrounded by golden light, but Shinya assures her that's normal when learning a new skill, and her mind is flooded with thoughts on how to use purification. Shinya congratulates her, and Rashia realizes she can now save the orphans. He suggests they leave the area after resting, but Yuzuha suddenly senses a strange presence, and Shinya notices something in the sky, so Avis is worried, but Rashia thinks it's beautiful. Avis reveals that it's the magical matter of the undead, and when drained from the monsters, their forms disappear. All the material accumulates into one mass in the sky, and falls in the form of a giant skull-faced Jack. Rashia is terrified, and they discover it's a skull-faced lord, which is at level 804. It can easily destroy an entire nation, so Shinya thinks the seal might not hold. The creature suddenly leaps into the sky, and punches the barrier, causing it to break. They can't believe it only took one hit, and Rashia falls to the ground in despair. They decide to flee, but the Lord roars, raising an army of undead to surround them. Avis wants to break through and escape, but Shinya's demeanor changes, and he explains he's staying. Avis tries to talk to him, but Shinya removes his limiter, and asks them to return to the city. Avis understands immediately, and Shinya casts a physical enhancement buff to help him escape. He clears a path for Avis, and after they leave, Shinya summons his sword. Yuzuha uses her fire to deal with the undead, but the Skull Lord keeps summoning more. Shinya launches a powerful attack, creating a crater in the ground, while Shay notices the explosion and goes to investigate. He checks his map and sees he's completely surrounded, but a blue marker suddenly appears, cutting through the undead army. He remembers that a blue marker means an ally, so he jumps to join her and finally meets Shay, but they don't have much time alone, so Yuzuha raises a barrier so they can talk. She throws herself into his arms, and he says he's back, as a tear runs down her face. Yuzuha's mana runs out, so they decide to deal with the Skull Lord first. They use a combined spell, quickly killing the weaker undead, and the Skull Lord also takes damage as Shinya summons another sword, and takes the opportunity to land the finishing blow. It falls to the ground, demanding power before dying, and Shinya is shocked that a monster can talk. He retrieves the orb, and suggests finishing their conversation. He explains that after defeating the boss, and freeing everyone from the game, a portal threw him 500 years into the future. Shay reveals that she and the other support characters didn't disappear after he cleared the dungeon, so they waited for their masters. But the continent was thrown into chaos after the incident, so the group decided to split up to help control the disasters, and she later returned to the Moon Sanctuary. She's happy to find her master again, but he begs her to stop calling him master since she's a legend now, and it will attract too much attention. He asks her to call him by his name, but they blush when she does. She wonders what he'll do next, and he talks about his plan to visit the sacred place and find clues about how to return. Shay has been there, but admits she couldn't investigate much, and she's also sad to know that Shinya wants to go back to his world. The day breaks, so they decide to return to the sanctuary to organize a celebration party for their reunion. She notices Yuzuha, and he explains she's an elemental, but he realizes she now has 3 tails. She suddenly starts talking, and Shinya freaks out as she explains that this ability was restored when he defeated the Skull Lord. Shinya thinks it's because he was a boss, but he asks the fox not to talk in front of people and also to merge her 3 tails into one to avoid attention, so she follows his instructions. She asks if she's a good girl, and Shay finds her cute, so he lets her pet Yuzuha. He remembers Avis and Rashia, so he decides to catch up with them before they reach the guild. We see Avis running with Rashia, and he senses something approaching, so they prepare to fight, but discover it's just Shinya, as Rashia faints in fear. Meanwhile, Rion arrives at the battle site, and wonders who could have made such a powerful attack, and she also remembers the attack that got rid of the undead. A soldier named Godras interrupts her, showing her the blade found in the ravine, and he recognizes the falcon emblem on the hilt. He demonstrates the blade's power, telling her it's almost broken, but it still holds immense power. He thinks that the only one capable of forging swords of this caliber is the ebon blacksmith, the most skilled artisan among the high humans. Rion is surprised, since high humans are extinct, and Godras admits they can't be sure, but the person responsible is strong enough to treat such a weapon as disposable. She remembers that the blacksmith owns the Moon Sanctuary, so she suggests they visit the place. Godras wonders what she'd do if she found out that a high human is still alive, and she declares she'd challenge him to a duel, but wouldn't mind marrying him. Godras pleads with her not to attack him just to test his skill, and she assures him she has more sense than that, but he isn't so sure. Meanwhile, Avis demands that Shinya explain himself after seeing his relationship with Shay. She's happy to see him again, but Avis insists on knowing what happened. Shinya tries to lie, saying she defeated the boss, but Avis points his spear at him. He attacks, and tells him to stop playing dumb, so Shinya finally confesses that he's a high human, and Shay recognizes him as her master. Avis mentions that high humans are incredibly strong, and extremely skilled in their specialties, so some people even revere them as gods. Shinya reveals that he's a blacksmith, and even offers to upgrade his spear at a discount, but Avis warns him not to touch his weapon. Rashia finally wakes up, and she's surprised to see Shay. The group continues back to the city, and Shinya wonders if it's okay to part ways at the gate. Avis reminds him that the task was to teach Rashia the purification skill, so he has already completed the task, but Shinya gives Avis a message card to contact him if anything goes wrong. He tries to refuse, but Shinya doesn't want to abandon the first friend he made in the city, so Avis accepts. He heads to the city with Rashia, and Shay comments that Shinya never bragged, but he always protected the weak. He suggests going to the Moon Sanctuary, and we see her happy to be with him. They arrive at the sanctuary, and Tiara runs to tell Shay about Shinya, but realizes they came together. She asks if he's staying for dinner, and Shay says it's obvious, revealing that he's the owner of the Moon Sanctuary. She freaks out, admitting she didn't take him seriously when he introduced himself as a high human, but now she has to believe it. She realizes he's her boss, and begs him to forgive her for her insolence, but he explains that he prefers to keep things casual. He also introduces the Elemental as his new pet Yuzuha, and she's even more surprised. It's dinner time, and Shinya is impressed with the food. Tiara has never seen dishes like these before, and he's happy that he gave Shay the ingredients to make the meal. Tiara notices an aura around the food, and wonders what kind of ingredients these are. Shinya is confused, because he doesn't see anything, and lists some high-quality meats and vegetables for monsters, which are almost impossible to obtain. Tiara is shocked, because they're so rare that no one would ever think of cooking with them, while Shay explains that the aura is the remnants of mana or life force, which is normal in powerful monsters and rare plants. They decide to eat, and enjoy the meal together. Shinya hears about what happened with the other support characters, and is happy to know they have their own lives now. Tiara suddenly interrupts them, and Shinya notices she's drunk, so Shay puts her to bed, as he laughs and heads to his room. He notices that his room hasn't changed at all, and sees Yuzuha sleeping on the bed. He goes to sleep, but later wakes up to find Shay lying next to him, so he wonders what happened, and gets nervous about the situation. But she holds him, and starts crying while calling his name in her sleep, so he apologizes for leaving her. In the morning, Shinya wakes up, and gets nervous seeing Yuzuha has taken on a human form as she hugs him. He creates clothes used by humanoid elemental, so she thanks him, but struggles to wear them. They go down for breakfast, and Shay is happy to see that Yuzuha has transformed. After the meal, they hear Yuzuha's story, and she explains that she tried to stop the cataclysm 500 years ago, but suddenly felt pain, which was less severe at the sanctuary. She nearly died, but Shinya appeared, and saved her at the last moment. He mentions that he only found her thanks to Millie, so Yuzuha wants to thank her again later. Shay suggests they make an elven treat that Tiara makes as a gift, since it's one of their best-selling products. Shinya points out that the Moon Sanctuary shouldn't be specializing in food, but Shay explains that they couldn't replenish the weapons, because only Shinya can open the arsenal, so he decides to make blades later. She changes the subject, and wants them to meet Gerard. Shinya is surprised to hear that he's alive, because high beasts only live up to 150 years, and it's been 500 years since he saw him, but Shay explains that he's been waiting for Shinya all these years. Gerard was the first beast king, and took the throne when he united the various beast tribes. The current king is the 8th, and she heard he's a good ruler, so Gerard must be doing well. Shinya wants to meet him, and decides they will leave the next day. Tiara promises to guard the shop, but Shay wants her to join them this time. She doesn't need to stay in the barrier, and now that Shinya is around, the shop can be moved anywhere. Tiara loves the idea, so Shinya mentions they should gather supplies for the trip, and Shay mentions that she's going to the kingdom to report about the Skullface Lord, so she can take care of the supplies. Shinya decides to look for a job in the direction of Farid, to rank up while they travel, and also wants to make swords, and restock the inventory. Shay suggests creating a party to use voice chat, and Shinya is surprised to learn it's now known as telepathy. He adds everyone, and Shay also suggests that Tiara register as an adventurer. Shinya opens the forge, and warns Yuzuha not to touch anything, as some items are cursed. He starts working, but his first blade is at a level far beyond anything available in the country shops, so he reduces the quality, and restocks the inventory. Tiara changes into adventurer clothes, and is ready to go, so they head out together. Shinya feels embarrassed by her new clothes, and she says he'll carry the shopping as punishment for staring at her. Tiara is surprised by how busy the market is, as she drags him around, but Shinya reminds her that she doesn't know where the guild is, so he guides her there, and Tiara blushes as he holds her hand. His rank has increased to E, and Celia explains that his report about the Skullface in the undead army was verified, so they earned a promotion, but they can't increase too much at once. She asks about his relationship with Tiara, and Shinya explains that they're going on a journey, but Celia doesn't believe it, and thinks they're lovers, because they were holding hands. He explains that it's not like that, but she insists they don't need to be embarrassed. Shinya decides to change the subject, and asks if she has any information about the Holy Land, the place that seemed to have been destroyed during the Dusk of Prosperity. She explains that only adventurers above C rank can have that information, so he decides to ask again when he ranks up. He looks for a quest on the way to Farid, and she tells him about a mission to escort a carriage to a transit point called Beirun, and she explains that the departure is at Nilan. They leave the guild, and Tiara thinks they still have plenty of time together, so Shinya suggests walking around the city and visiting the church, which excites Tiara, and they enjoy each other's company while browsing the shops. They go to the church, and Shinya greets Rashia. Tiara introduces herself, and Rashia is amazed to learn that she's from the Moon Sanctuary. She asks how she became Shay's disciple, and we learn that Rashia is completely obsessed with Shay. They go inside, and Millie hugs Yuzuha and Shinya. Rashia tells him she has been appointed the next priest of the temple, and Tria mentions that they're grateful to him. Shinya asks about Avis, so they explain that he went to check on the priest who almost took the church, and they want to understand his intentions. Shinya thinks it makes sense, and he asks them to give him a bracelet. He also made a necklace for Millie, so they thank him for his generosity. They say goodbye to get Tiara's guild card, and Celica hands it to her. Shinya thinks it's time to take the Moon Sanctuary, and Tiara admits it's strange to take a house along, but Shinya thinks it's natural for him. They go to an alley, and Shinya shows her a crystal with a teleportation spell linked to it, which allows them to return to a registered location, but it's disposable. She reveals that teleportation is a lost magic, but Shinya assures her he can make as many as he wants if he has the necessary ingredients, reminding her that he's a legendary high human. They use the crystal, and Tiara is impressed by the teleportation. Shinya decides it's time to go, so he uses a command to store the Moon Sanctuary, and he shows her a necklace, revealing that it's the portable mode of the sanctuary. Tiara thinks it's amazing, and Shinya decides to head to the quest location. They reach the carriage, and an adventurer named Gain greets them. Another adventurer named Tsubaki appears, and since they also took the quest, they'll be working together. The dwarf merchant Nak tells them he's counting on them to get to Beirun, so they set off on their way. In the castle, the king meets with his officials, and learns that the Moon Sanctuary has disappeared. He's upset because the building has existed since before the Dusk of Prosperity, and no one can conquer it, since it was made with lost technology, and he thinks the problem extends beyond the kingdom. They wonder about Shay, and according to reports, she's heading toward the castle and will arrive within a day. The princess thinks they have too little information to act and reminds him that Rion is still yet to arrive, so the king has no choice but to agree with her. In the carriage, Shinya thinks it's a good idea to get to know each other's skills. Gain explains that he's an A-class samurai, but doesn't know how to use magic, while Tsubaki mentions that she's an E-rank brawler and can use support magic to enhance her speed. Tiara explains that she's an alchemist and just became an adventurer, but she can also use a sword or bow and simple healing magic. Shinya reveals that he's a samurai like Gain, but can use a bit of fire and lightning magic, and he also introduces Yuzuha as a monster, explaining that he has a tamer contract with her. Gain is impressed that a samurai can use magic and thinks Shinya must have undergone intense training, and it's also rare for someone to be liked by monsters. Tsubaki is surprised that he isn't from Hinamoto, since most samurais come from there. In the kingdom, most people choose to become knights or warriors, so those who choose to be samurais are considered odd. Shinya assures them that it's a great class, but Tsubaki thinks it's too much effort, since a samurai needs to train as a knight and a berserker as a prerequisite. Gain explains that Hanamoto is an island formed after tectonic changes, and it has many samurai-based guilds, so those who want to be fighters admire them there. He mentions the names of the guilds, and Shinya is surprised to learn that the guilds from 500 years ago have formed a country. The carriage suddenly stops, and a group of bandits appear, so Shinya tells Yuzuha to protect Nak, and they hide in the carriage. They prepare to fight, and Tiara is nervous because she has never killed anyone before. The bandits think they have no chance, and also demand that they hand over Tsubaki so that they can have fun with her. They keep provoking her, which makes Shinya furious, as Tiara notices a murderous aura in him and wants him to return to normal, realizing she needs to shoot. The bandits know most of them are low rank, and Gain realizes they have an informant. An arrow suddenly flies through, killing a hidden bandit, and the others attack, as Tsubaki uses her speed enhancement to defeat one of them. Gain also attacks, cuts right through the bandit's sword. Shinya takes down two at once, and the leader realizes they're not ordinary E-ranks. Shinya cuts his sword, and the bandit sees a terrifying look on his face. We see the bandit beaten up, and Shinya demands that he give up his informant, but Tiara suddenly grabs him to calm him down. Tsubaki is confused, and Shinya wonders what she's doing, as Tiara realizes his mood has returned to normal. Shinya and Tsubaki are shocked, and Tiara blushes, realizing she instinctively did what Shay used to do when she was little. The group heads on their way, and Gain thinks the bandit attacked them because the wagon was connected to the church, so Shinya thinks about what they were after. They make it to Beirun, and Nak gives them all certificates of completion. After they report to the guild, Shinya wonders where Gain and Tsubaki are headed next. So they mention they are headed to Kilmont, and hope to meet again in the future. Shinya notes that they're still a long way from Farned, so he suggests buying their own carriage. They go to check them out, but Shinya finds them all the same, so he thinks about modifying one, but Tiara worries about him overdoing it. They find one they like, and the seller asks if they have bought horses yet, mentioning they may need more than one since the carriage is quite heavy, but Shinya thinks he could use Yuzuha as a last resort. He gets a call from Shay, and she mentions she has finished her business in the kingdom. She offers to catch a monster to pull the carriage, and says she will arrive after a day. She also mentions the commotion caused by moving the sanctuary, but thinks it's a good thing, because she's tired of them constantly trying to recruit her. They head to an inn, and it's quite expensive, but they decide it's okay to treat themselves. Yuzuha also relaxes, and they all have dinner together. Tiara wants to have a bath before going to bed, and Yuzuha asks to join her. They head into the bath, but Shinya hears them fooling around, so he gets bricked up and distracts himself by looking outside, while we see Shay coming across an enormous beast. She arrives the next morning, so the group goes to meet her. Yuzuha detects something up ahead, and we see that Shay has tamed an enormous jade wolf. Shinya notes that it's also a unique monster, and Tiara can't believe it, but the wolf takes a liking to her. Shinya wonders why Shay chose it, so she mentions it had to be a sacred class monster to serve him. He thinks it's way too big, but Shay predicted he would say this, and reveals the wolf can make itself smaller. Shay wonders if he likes it, but starts to get sad and wonders if she did something wrong, so he quickly assures her he's happy with it. Yuzuha is able to talk to it, and mentions its name is Shimmer. They head off to Farned, and they can't help but attract attention. Tiara notes how smooth the ride is, thanks to Shinya's modifications, and Shay notes that it even outperforms a royal carriage. Yuzuha talks to Shimmer as he runs, and we learn that when he was young, he and his mother ruled the sacred mountain, but his mother was defeated by an adventurer and only he survived. He ran away as fast as he could, and ended up being saved by an elf, which happened to be Tiara. She remembers saving a puppy 100 years ago, and can't believe they are the same. Shay offers to transfer his ownership over to her, so they take a break to do this. Shay dissolves her ownership, and Tiara forms a contract with him. Tiara is exhausted after this, so they decide to rest for the night. Shinya asks about Shay's intentions, so she mentions she wants Shimmer to protect Tiara, since she can't always be around. We see them in the forest approaching Farned, and they are met by two high beasts. Shinya can tell they are high level, and Shay mentions she messaged Gerard, so he must have sent the two to meet them. They offer to take them to see the first king, so Shinya packs up the carriage and they follow after them. They arrive at a great mansion, and the group is taken to Gerard, who is surprised to see his master after all these years. He pays his respects, and introduces the current King Wolfgang and his daughter Curie, but Shinya tells him he can stop calling him master, so he explains that he's just doing this to put everyone at ease, reminding Shinya that high humans are considered as legendary beings. In a flashback, we see Shinya and Gerard as they're surrounded by countless monsters. Gerard reveals that he has killed thousands of them, but Shinya tells him the fight isn't over yet, so he prepares to take them on, as Shinya tells him to watch his back. We return to the present, as they wonder how they were able to survive that battle. Gerard lost count of how many monsters he killed, and he mentions that the world has changed. Shinya knows that he founded a nation, so he realizes that Shay told him everything, and she explains that she wanted him to learn the truth, knowing Gerard would exaggerate the story. She leaves to prepare tea, and Gerard asks Shinya why he went missing for 500 years, so he tells him everything that happened, but he mentions that it isn't so bad. Gerard realizes this is a great opportunity for him, and he reveals that his life is about to come to an end, thinking he only has a few months left, because his health is starting to decline. He thinks the gods heard his prayers, because Shinya returned, and he challenges him to a duel, saying he wants to fight his master before he dies, because he thinks Shinya is the strongest warrior in the world. So he realizes that Gerard wants to die in battle, and he accepts the challenge, asking Gerard if Wolfgang knows about this. So he explains that everyone knows about his condition, and he's going to tell them about the duel. He tells Shinya about his companions, thinking they already know how he wants to die, and he mentions that they're also getting old, so he believes they understand his situation. He thinks Wolfgang is a capable leader, so the nation is going to prosper after he dies. Shinya asks him if he has any regrets, so he explains that he has none, but he doesn't want to die until he has a duel with his master. That evening, Gerard tells his companions that he has found the place where he wants to die, and he tells them about the duel, saying it will take place after a week. His confidants realize that the time has finally come, and he explains that his wish is about to be granted, but Curie asks them why they're so calm, because she doesn't want him to die. So he explains that he has lived a long life, saying he's been preparing for this moment, and he thinks he's about to have the greatest battle of his life, so he wants everyone to watch it. We cut to Shinya, as he thinks about Gerard, and he appears to be sad, so Yuzuha asks him if something's bothering him, but he tells her he's okay. Gerard recalls the moment when Shinya disappeared, revealing that he was filled with regret, because he thought his wish would never come true. So he's glad that Shinya returned, because he can finally have the death he always wanted. Days pass, and Shinya sees Gerard's equipment, realizing it's in terrible condition, so he decides to repair it. He shows it to Gerard, telling him he can fight without holding back, and he thanks Shinya, realizing that their fight will begin the next day. He asks Shinya if he's going to leave Shay, so that he can return to his world, and he explains that he will, saying he's been fighting to return home, but he wants everyone to be happy when he's gone. The next day, everyone makes their way to the forest, and Gerard is excited, thinking it's the best day for a duel. The others decide to watch the battle from above, and Shay promises to protect everyone from any stray attacks, so he can focus on the fight. Gerard tells Wolfgang to take care of the nation, and he promises to be a good king, saying he's grateful for everything Gerard taught him. Curie promises to get stronger so that she can become a warrior Gerard can be proud of, and he prepares for the duel, as his confidants mention that he has never been this happy. Shinya and Gerard start fighting, and the others see an explosion as their powers clash, destroying everything around them. Gerard is able to keep up with Shinya, and his companions are impressed, realizing he's stronger than they thought, because he's able to match the strength of a high human. But Shay thinks they're just getting started, knowing they still haven't unleashed their full powers. Tierra wonders if Shay is as strong as them, so she admits that she would struggle against Gerard, and Tierra realizes she's also a beast. Gerard mentions he developed new techniques to defeat Shinya, but none of them are working, and Shinya tells him to stop holding back, so he decides to use his full power. He transforms into a werewolf, as he recalls that Shinya promised not to use the title he acquired from defeating the final boss, thinking it would be unfair. So Gerard knows that Shinya could instantly end the fight if he wanted to, knowing Shinya is far stronger than him, but he still wants to fight him at full power. Shinya tries to attack with magic, but Gerard suddenly disappears, and launches a counterattack, pushing Shinya back. He unleashes his ultimate technique, as he fires a powerful blast, which destroys everything in its path, but Shinya manages to block it, and he realizes that Gerard is right behind him. He struggles to defend himself, as Gerard continues to pursue him, attacking him relentlessly, so he jumps away, realizing that Gerard is putting everything on the line to defeat him. So he decides to fight seriously, and they both unleash their ultimate techniques, causing a massive clash of energy, as Shay notes that the fight is about to come to an end. Gerard manages to break Shinya's sword, and he sees an opening, so he prepares to land the finishing blow. He delivers the attack, but Shinya notes that he's out of strength, and he coughs up blood as he returns to his human form, realizing that his time has come. Shinya admits defeat, and Gerard reveals that he trained 500 years for that moment, so he's glad that he was able to fight him in the end. But he knows that Shinya was still holding back, and he asks him to display his full power. So Shinya unleashes his aura, creating a massive pillar of light, and Gerard is happy to be able to witness his full power. Shinya returns to the others with Gerard, telling them that he was able to ascend to the level of a high human because he was able to defeat him in the duel. Curie mourns his death, but his companions note that he died happy, so she realizes they shouldn't cry for him because he died without regrets. Everyone attends Gerard's funeral, and they all pay their respects, but Shinya appears to be sad. That evening, Shay sees him, and she realizes he's depressed, so she hugs him, saying she's willing to do anything for him. He explains that he gave Gerard the fight he always wanted, but he's sad because his friend died, so he starts crying. But she tells him it's okay, because he fulfilled his duty, so he can cry as much as he needs. The next day, the group heads into the city, and Shinya wonders why they have beast ears, so Shay mentions how elves stand out, so they're trying to blend in. She asks Shinya what he thinks, so he tells her she looks good, and Tierra is surprised to see her master acting like this. We learn they are there to see Zai, one of Shinya's other companions, because he was also at Gerard's funeral as a representative for his country. They go to where all the representatives are staying, and Shinya wonders if Zai also became a king like Gerard, so Shay mentions how he was the first emperor of the Dragon Empire, but he ended up retiring. They are taken to a room, and Zai is brought to them. He instantly bows to Shinya, swearing to serve him once more, but Shinya tells him to relax, and Shay mentions how things are different now. They have some tea, and Zai wonders what Shinya plans on doing next. So he explains how he is headed to the Sacred Palace to do more research, and Zai asks to join him after he first goes back to his country. They decide to keep in touch with their telepathy, and as Shinya leaves, he gives Zai his old weapon back. He's amazed to see it after so long, and notices that it's even stronger than he remembers. So Shinya mentions he leveled up his mana control when he was fixing Gerard's equipment, so he was able to make the weapon 5 times stronger. Zai is amazed by how quickly his abilities grow, and Curie can't believe it. They visit the Adventurers Guild, and Shinya decides to level up his adventurer rank, so he takes a goblin slaying mission, and Curie asks to tag along. They head into the forest, and they all easily take out a goblin each. Shinya turns in the quest, and the clerk mentions there's also a message for him. It turns out to be from Guildmaster Barlux, and it seems Shinya is being summoned by the palace. Tiara wonders what the palace wants with him, so he remembers the incident with his Skullface's sword, causing him to panic. He visits Wolfgang before he leaves, and he gives him Gerard's gauntlets. Wolfgang notes how they were destroyed in the fight, but Shinya mentions how he was the one who created them, so repairing it was no problem. Wolfgang tries them on, finding the power unbelievable, and Shinya tells him that it's up to him to pass them on. They say farewell, and Shinya prepares to teleport, since using the wagon would be too slow. They return to the location of the old moon sanctuary, and Shinya can tell they are being watched. Shay thinks the kingdom must be hoping the moon sanctuary will reappear, but she starts worrying about if Shinya disappears again. Shinya meets with Barlux at the guild, and he introduces a mage named Arad, who helps appraise gems for the guild. Shinya wonders why the palace is summoning him, but Arad suddenly asks him if he knows about the sword that flew into the palace and crashed into the princess's room. Shinya is shocked learning this, and Arad notes how the sword is comparable to a royal treasure. He also mentions the gem Shinya left behind from the Skullface, saying the mana matched the sword, so they figured out Shinya was behind the incident. But Barlux mentions that since he has a recommendation letter from the Moon Sanctuary, he isn't in any trouble, but mentions it was the second Princess Rion who summoned him. At night, Shinya explains the situation to the others, and Shay thinks that the kingdom must be trying to recruit him or marry him off to a noble. He wonders what he should do, so Shay suggests pretending that he's engaged to her, or even engaged to Tiara, and Yuzuha also wants to be his fiancée, but he panics hearing this, since she's way too young. The next day, Shinya visits the castle, and he's escorted by Godras. We see Godras is at level 188, and Shinya wonders if he's the strongest knight in the kingdom. Shinya is taken to the princess's room, and he meets with Rion. He wonders why she summoned him, so she reveals the sword from the Skullface. She imagines that the Skullface must have been strong, so Shinya plays along and mentions that he even broke his weapon when he fought it. Rion suddenly calls him different, mentioning how when other adventurers distinguish themselves, they are summoned, but some have used it as an opportunity for assassinations. However, she thinks Shinya is safe, but he mentions she has no proof about this, so she explains she has the intuition skill. She decides to get to the point of why she summoned him, and Shinya thinks she's really about to ask him to marry her, but she suddenly just asks to fight him. But that's where this video ends. Remember to like and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.